Welcome, chosen ones. Civilizations don't collapse at the hands of obvious villains alone. They begin to fracture when ordinary people choose comfort over truth. What follows isn't fiction or exaggeration, but a deeper reflection of how easily silence can replace courage when it matters most. And once that line is crossed, the cost of staying quiet grows heavier than anyone expects, shaping outcomes that can no longer be undone. This speaks to something far more unsettling: the way a blameless individual can be singled out in full view, worn down piece by piece, while those around them later insist they never realized the depth of the damage. That realization alone has shattered alliances, exposed false loyalties, and unraveled carefully built images once the truth could no longer be ignored. Here's a truth that unsettles even the most self-assured. Widespread injustice rarely begins with open malice. It grows from quiet approval. When wrongdoing is disguised as protocol or routine, the weight of accountability seems to dissolve. People don't have to harbor ill intent. They only have to follow along without question. And in doing so, they become part of something far more damaging than they ever intended. The warning signs appeared from the very beginning: clear, repeated, impossible to ignore. Still, the damage pressed on, not out of logic, but because ending it would have demanded someone step into discomfort. And time again, that's the threshold most refuse to cross. The point where doing what's right costs them their ease, their image, or their place within the crowd. There's an almost bitter irony in how this cycle repeats itself with such precision. It begins with quiet targeting, evolves into rationalization, settles into silence, and ends with performative disbelief when everything comes to light. The very individuals who once dismissed it as nothing suddenly react as if they've been blindsided, scrambling to distance themselves from a reality they helped sustain. It might almost be amusing if it didn't expose so much. What you're seeing now is the aftermath, the instant when denial can no longer hold and is replaced by a surge of reaction. But this isn't outrage rooted in compassion. It's sparked by sudden awareness. Because when someone meant to be erased endures and rises anyway, the entire narrative shifts, and those who watched quietly are forced to confront what their silence truly allowed. The focus shifts, and everything that once stayed hidden is forced into view. The anger surfacing now isn't rooted in the actions themselves. It's driven by the irreversible nature of what's been revealed. Sit with that. What comes next isn't about retaliation or theatrics. It's about truth surfacing, responsibility taking shape, and the stark realization that innocence, once proven, cannot be erased or rewritten. Before we begin, take a moment to join our growing community here on Cosmic Chrysalis by hitting that subscribe button, turning on the notification bell, and leaving a like. Every small action helps this message reach the exact people who need to hear it. If you're here, it's not by accident. You're aligning with something bigger, and this is your moment to claim your place within it. Share this with someone who needs this message and drop the number 222 in the comments to show you're locked in and ready. I truly appreciate the energy each of you brings. Now let's step into point number 1. Number 1. What occurred wasn't some innocent misreading of events. It was a deliberate lapse in integrity. People will try to dilute it with softer labels like confusion, tension, or unfortunate timing, because the truth is harder to sit with. But those are just narratives crafted for comfort. A true misunderstanding corrects itself the moment clarity arrives. This persisted, even after the truth was impossible to ignore. What you endured didn't stop when the truth surfaced, when the facts aligned, or when your innocence stood undeniable. It carried on despite clarity, despite evidence, despite every opportunity to correct course. That isn't uncertainty. That's a decision. And when harm persists in the presence of truth, it crosses the line from error into a conscious failure of character. This kind of collapse isn't sudden or loud. It forms in silence. One person senses something is off and chooses not to speak. Another witnesses the damage, but convinces themselves it's not their place to intervene. Someone else gains by looking the other way. Piece by piece, small compromises stack up until integrity is quietly exchanged for comfort, and what once felt wrong becomes something people simply learn to live with. By the time the consequences become undeniable, everyone involved has already prepared their version of events. That's what gives it a calculated edge, even if no one openly admits it. And what makes it even more unsettling is this: you didn't instigate any of it. There was no aggression, no recklessness, no justification to paint you as deserving. Yet despite that, the narrative was twisted, and the harm was carried forward anyway. You existed, nothing more, in an environment that had no tolerance for truth unfiltered by control. And somehow, that was enough to make you a target. In places where power depends on maintaining a narrative, honesty becomes dangerous. So instead of confronting the flaw, they turn on the one who reveals it simply by being real. Because eliminating the mirror feels easier than fixing what it reflects. People like to imagine wrongdoing as something explosive and unmistakable, something that announces itself with noise and chaos. But more often, it arrives quietly, dressed in professionalism and routine. It speaks in policies, hides behind titles, and moves through systems under the guise of "this is just how it works." That's why so many took part without ever seeing themselves as the problem. They were simply following the script, never questioning who it was written to harm. They weren't fueled by anger or open hostility. They were guided by ease, by the instinct to blend in, and by the quiet comfort of not being the one in the line of fire. And what makes it so disturbing now is how clearly it all reads in hindsight. Time strips away the justifications people once leaned on, and distance reveals the pattern for what it truly was, something far more intentional than anyone wanted to admit. And when it becomes undeniable that someone innocent was not just hurt, but targeted again and again with full awareness, something shifts internally. The narrative no longer holds. Concern hardens into anger, and quiet acceptance transforms into a heavy sense of guilt. Because at a fundamental level, people understand this. When harm continues after the truth is clear, it is no longer a lack of awareness. It is a deliberate choice. Take a moment and pause with me, chosen one. If something in this message is speaking to you, if you felt even a spark of truth or clarity, go ahead and subscribe and turn on the notification bell. This isn't just about following a channel. It's about stepping into your place here at Cosmic Chrysalis. Hit that like button so this message can reach others who are still searching for it. Now, let's return to the message. Number 2, the intensity of the mistreatment grew precisely because there was nothing in you that justified it. That's the harsh paradox. There was no logic, no fault to point to, no flaw to anchor the narrative. And instead of stopping it, that absence became fuel. People like to believe harm is directed at error or vulnerability, but sometimes it escalates simply because innocence leaves no defense for those who need one. But when someone blameless becomes the focus, that very purity disrupts everything. You didn't stumble, didn't create an opening, didn't hand anyone a justification, and that absence of fault became the trigger. Because for those determined to shape the story, innocence is inconvenient. It refuses to fit the script, and instead of adjusting the narrative, they turn against the one person who proves it wrong simply by existing. Their behavior didn't intensify in spite of your character. It intensified because of it. When their actions find no footing in your reality, something unsettles them. The structure they relied on to make sense of their choices starts to fracture. And when their reasoning can't hold up against your consistency, they don't correct themselves. They double down, trying harder to force a narrative that simply won't align with the truth. And that's when the pressure increases. What began as something small evolves into a relentless effort, no longer tied to one moment, but to the need to force an outcome. It stops being about the situation and becomes about you, about trying to bend someone who won't yield. In that moment, you stand as proof that their version of reality doesn't hold. And that's what drives the escalation. It isn't chaotic. It follows a pattern shaped by their inability to control what they cannot change. Every quiet remark, every subtle dig, every calculated move to weaken you was a direct reaction to your refusal to bend, to your steady composure and unshaken integrity. The more you endured without breaking, the more pressure they felt to push harder. It was as if something within their system couldn't reconcile your consistency, forcing them to intensify their efforts in a desperate attempt to make you fit a narrative you never belonged to. You became the anomaly they couldn't reconcile, and your refusal to fit their expectations pushed their tactics into something more frantic, more aggressive, and far more revealing. What's striking is that none of it reflects on you. It exposes them. The inability to pause, to correct course when fairness demanded it, reveals not strength, but a profound absence of integrity they could no longer hide. They weren't simply going after a person. They were attempting to bend reality itself to match their fear, their insecurity, and their need for control. What often goes unnoticed at first is that this kind of escalation is revealing. The more frantic and forceful the attacks become, the more it signals that the truth is standing firm. Desperation doesn't emerge from confidence. It rises when facts refuse to be erased. Your blamelessness, which should have been your safeguard, instead became a reflection they couldn't avoid, a mirror exposing everything they hoped to keep hidden. And that's why it intensified. The hostility wasn't driven by any wrongdoing on your part. It was provoked by the fact that you wouldn't carry the guilt they needed you to accept. Before we move into the next revelation, take a moment to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single moment meant for your journey. Leave a like as a way of affirming your growth and grounding yourself in this path. This isn't just a channel. It's a space you're stepping into with intention. Your place at Cosmic Chrysalis is here. Claim it. Now let's move into the next point. Number 3, this wasn't driven by individual resentment. It was sustained by shared avoidance. What unfolded wasn't the result of fleeting emotions or isolated conflicts. It reflected a pattern of quiet alignment where actions overlapped and reinforced each other in a way that points to something deeper. The consistency, the timing, the way it all fit together suggests not chaos, but a coordinated failure to stand up when it mattered most. It was fear amplified through agreement. No single individual would have had the courage or the justification to do what was done to you on their own. It required a crowd, a structure, a quiet alignment of people each choosing, in their own way, to allow it. Whether spoken or unspoken, that shared permission is what gave the harm its power, and that is what defines true collective cowardice. The unsettling reality is that many who played a part weren't inherently malicious. They were afraid. Afraid of drawing attention to themselves, of stepping outside the group, of facing the consequences that come with doing what's right. Because standing firm in truth demands courage, and courage often comes at a cost. And when that cost feels too high, most choose safety over integrity, even if it means allowing harm to continue. Instead, the harm spread quietly, shared across many hands until it felt almost invisible. Each action seemed minor on its own, a passing comment, a moment of inaction, a rule enforced without thought, but together, they formed something far more destructive. Piece by piece, these small choices aligned, turning into a force that targeted someone who had done nothing to deserve it. Cowardice rarely presents itself as open hostility. More often, it hides behind composure, policy, and the convenient language of obligation. That is what makes it so dangerous. The people who contributed to your suffering did not need to be loud or openly cruel. They only needed to stay passive, follow the pattern, and cooperate with an environment where silence was rewarded and moral courage came with consequences. In other words, harm persisted because it was easier for everyone to look away than to step forward. And that's what makes it so unsettling. The injustice didn't grow from one person's failure, but from many choosing the safer path at the same time. When you were targeted, it wasn't isolated. It was reinforced, sustained by a quiet alignment of people who, in their silence or compliance, allowed it to continue. Their shared silence and quiet cooperation built a momentum that felt impossible to challenge. And that's why the reaction now is so intense. The pattern is clear, the hesitation was deliberate, and the missed chances to intervene are impossible to ignore. People recognize that at any moment, someone could have chosen differently. And the fact that no one did is what makes it so difficult to accept. Your experience reveals something deeper about shared responsibility. It isn't only defined by those who act, but by those who choose not to. The moment fear of consequence outweighs the instinct to do what's right, protection disappears. And that's exactly what unfolded. No grand vendetta, no singular driving force, just a chain of hesitation where courage was required and withheld when it mattered most. A quick moment for the chosen ones tuning in. Make sure you've hit that subscribe button and turned on the notification bell so you stay connected to every message we share. Drop a like to help this energy reach others who are meant to find it. You're here as part of the cosmic chrysalis journey for a reason. Step into that and claim your place. Now let's dive back in. Number 4. They turned on you because you didn't collapse the way they anticipated. What makes this so striking is that their actions were never rooted in your shortcomings. They were triggered by your resilience. From the start, this wasn't about testing you or pushing your limits. It was about trying to force an outcome, one where you would fold, so their version of events could remain intact. It was structured as a test of your limits, an effort to see whether pressure would make you yield, whether persistence would wear you down, whether control could reshape your response. They operated with the assumption that anyone placed in your position would eventually give in, and their actions were built around that belief. But when you held steady instead of breaking, their expectations collapsed, and that's when the intensity began to rise. What they directed at you was never just about control. It was a response to the fact that you remained unshaken. Every measured reaction, every choice to stay grounded, every moment you refused to step into their script only intensified their unrest. You stood as something they hadn't planned for, a result that defied their expectations and exposed the limits of their influence. In their thinking, someone in your position was supposed to slip, to be cornered into doubt, or reshaped into something that justified their control. The expectation was that pressure would produce weakness, but your steadiness, your clarity, and your refusal to bend didn't just disrupt that expectation. It made it impossible to maintain. And what couldn't be controlled, couldn't be explained away, quickly became something they could no longer tolerate. That's why their actions grew more intense with time. It wasn't chaos or coincidence. It was a deliberate effort to force a collapse. Barriers were placed in your way. Tensions were manufactured. Narratives were quietly shaped, all with the expectation that pressure would eventually wear you down. Every move was calculated toward one outcome, to make you break where you consistently refused to. The more firmly you stood, the more their behavior shifted into something sharper, more relentless, and increasingly exposed. Your consistency highlighted a truth they couldn't reconcile, that their influence depended on others giving in. When that didn't happen, it revealed how unstable that control really was, and in that instability, their reactions intensified. What they directed at you was never a response to wrongdoing, because there was none. It was a reaction to the fact that their methods failed, and they didn't know how to exist without them. It was never about correcting you. It was about forcing you to confirm a belief they needed to be true. But by enduring, by remaining steady, you disrupted that belief entirely. You became the exception they couldn't control, the proof that their assumptions didn't hold. And that's why their response grew so intense. What they directed at you ended up revealing them instead, a reflection of the fear they carried and the false narratives your resilience quietly dismantled. A quick reminder for the chosen ones watching. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you stay aligned with every new video we release. Give us a like to help spread this frequency further. You are part of the cosmic chrysalis story for a reason. Make sure you've claimed your place. Now, let us dive into the very last point. Number 5. The intensity of the reaction now comes from the fact that reality can no longer be avoided. This shift isn't rooted in a sudden awakening of conscience. It's driven by evidence that leaves no room for denial. For a long time, what you experienced was easy for others to downplay, overlook, or reinterpret to ease their own discomfort. But now, with the truth fully visible, those narratives can no longer hold, and the weight of what was ignored has become impossible to escape. But truth doesn't stay buried forever. When it rises, it strips away every layer of justification people once relied on. What was hidden becomes unmistakable. Every distortion, every quiet maneuver, every effort to conceal now stands in plain view. And what drives the intensity of the reaction isn't just what happened, it's how undeniable it has become. Facts stand independent of belief, untouched by preference or bias. They don't adjust themselves to comfort anyone. They remain what they are. And when people are faced with clear proof that someone blameless was singled out, mistreated, and overlooked, the response cuts deeper. It's no longer filtered through doubt or interpretation. It becomes immediate, direct, and impossible to soften. The intensity you're seeing now isn't about spectacle or picking a side. It's about confronting a failure so clear that denial no longer works. When the truth stands unobstructed, all the distractions fade, and what remains is undeniable. The noise that once clouded everything has fallen away, leaving only the reality people can no longer avoid. This reaction also reveals something deeper. What happened wasn't quiet or easily misread. It unfolded in a way that was consistent, visible, and sustained over time. There was no real ambiguity to hide behind. And that's why, when people finally face the evidence, it doesn't feel distant or abstract. It feels immediate, as if they're confronting something that should have been addressed long ago. They begin to see just how foreseeable it all was, how easily it could have been stopped, and how long it persisted while people chose not to see it. That realization creates a tension that's hard to ignore. The gap between what they wanted to believe and what truly unfolded. And it's within that gap that the anger takes hold, because the truth exposes not just what happened, but how long it was allowed to happen. What gives this moment its weight is the shift it represents. The truth doesn't only illuminate what's already happened, it changes how things are understood now and influences what comes next. The intensity of the reaction isn't random. It reflects a deeper correction taking place as people begin to realign their actions with what they can no longer deny. It goes beyond anger alone. It marks a moment of awareness, of seeing clearly and admitting what was overlooked. What's unfolding now is the first step toward responsibility, where acknowledgement replaces avoidance. And at its core, the intensity of the reaction comes from one simple fact: the truth stands firm. It affirms your experience and brings into the light everything that was once denied. It brings the imbalance into sharp focus, removing any doubt about what truly took place. What you went through can no longer be framed as coincidence, confusion, or something you somehow caused. It reveals intention where others once claimed uncertainty. And now, with that clarity, the reality of it stands exposed for what it has always been. Congratulations on reaching the end of today's message. I sincerely appreciate you staying until the very end, chosen one. Your presence here strengthens this entire community more than you realize. If this message resonated with you, take a moment to like the video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop 1111 in the comments to affirm your place among the chosen ones and anchor this moment in your journey. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss the guidance meant for you. I'm truly grateful for you. Have a beautiful day, and may you stay protected, aligned, and blessed.